Hi, I'm Lina. Welcome to Lina's Storybook, where we share the most unforgettable audio novels. Let's get started.
My own daughter dragged me to a DNA testing clinic. When I asked her why, she sneered. I'm beautiful, talented, and smart. You are fat, ugly, and mean. There is no way you are my biological mother. My real mom should be someone like Aunt Sarah. I was so furious I agreed to the test. When the results confirmed our biological relation, she broke down in tears, screaming that she refused to inherit my trash genetics. She worshipped her cheating father, adored his glamorous mistress, and kicked me out of the house without a second thought. Shattered and weeping, I stumbled into the street and was lost my life to a speeding car. But instead of eternal darkness, I opened my eyes to the sterile lights of a hospital room. Right back to the day my daughter was diagnosed with her rare disease. This time, when my husband demanded I quit my career to be her full-time caregiver, I looked him dead in the eye and said, "No." Richard stared at me in absolute disbelief, his jaw slightly slack. "Anna, you need to get a grip on reality," he said, his voice echoing in the sterile hallway of the pediatric ward. "Chloe's condition is incredibly serious. Someone has to be at home to take care of her full-time. She needs specific meal prep, daily physical therapy, and constant monitoring. My mother can't handle all of that on her own. If you don't quit your job, how is our daughter going to get the treatment she needs?" I stood there, the familiar smell of rubbing alcohol and bleached hospital sheets filling my lungs. My heart, which had been deeply wounded in my previous life, now beat with a cold, steady rhythm. "Let me ask you something," I replied, my voice eerily calm. "Why is it that I have to be the one to quit? Why don't you resign?" Richard let out a frustrated sigh, looking at me as if I had just lost my mind. "Because you are the one who usually takes care of her, Anna. You know I don't know the first thing about taking care of a sick kid." A bitter chill spread through my chest, and I quietly clenched my fists. When I was pregnant, Richard had held my hands and promised me the world. He swore that we would be a modern team. I would go through the physical toll of childbirth, and he would take on the lion's share of raising the baby. We were supposed to be partners. I remembered the delivery room like it was yesterday. I had been in agonizing labor for 48 hours, suffering a severe third-degree tear. Barely out of the delivery ward, exhausted, and hooked up to IV fluids. My mother-in-law, Margaret, had leaned over my bed. She hadn't asked how I was feeling. Instead, she peered at the pink blanket and said, "Oh, it is a girl, Anna. Well, rest up quickly so you can start preparing for baby number 2. We need a boy to carry on the family name." Richard had stood right next to her, completely silent. It wasn't until I shot him a furious, exhausted glare that he finally intervened, muttering, "Mom, Anna is weak right now. Don't say that. It is the 21st century, boys and girls are the same." Margaret had backed away awkwardly, muttering, a girl is fine, but her actions over the next few months spoke louder than her words. She was entirely disengaged, and Richard's promise to take care of the baby, it was a joke. Because I was breastfeeding, Chloe needed to eat every 2 hours. I was tethered to the baby. When it was time to change diapers, soothe her colic, or give her a bath, the burden miraculously always fell on the mother. Margaret would make grand theatrical declarations about helping out, but her help consisted solely of barking orders. "Oh my Anna, the baby is crying, hurry up and feed her," or "Good Lord, her diaper is heavily soiled. Why haven't you changed it yet?" Or "Why does she have a diaper rash? Are you not wiping her properly?" I was half dead from sleep deprivation, recovering from a traumatic birth, and all I got was endless criticism. When Richard came home from his corporate job, he would hold Chloe for perhaps 10 minutes. Then, listening to his mother's endless complaining about my supposed incompetence, he would notice a tiny red spot on Chloe's arm, act as if his heart was breaking, and join in on condemning me. Once the scolding was over, he would cite his need for a good night's sleep for work tomorrow, toss the crying baby back into my arms, and retreat to the guest bedroom, shutting the door tightly behind him. It was a miracle he thought he could use. I don't know how to take care of a kid as an excuse now. He had deliberately weaponized his incompetence to avoid the hard work of parenting. Looking at his entitled, self-righteous face, A wave of pure fury washed over me. Is she just my child? I snapped. Does she not share your DNA? You promised me that if I brought her into this world, you would step up to raise her. Which part of that promise have you actually kept? Richard, realizing he was losing the moral high ground, fell silent for a moment before adopting a patronizing tone. Anna, let's be reasonable here. It's not that I don't want to help, but I work full-time. I can't bring a kid to the office. Plus, she was exclusively breastfed for a year. As a man, I literally couldn't help with that. She hasn't breastfed in years, Richard. And I still don't see you lifting a finger. I have to work, he retorted defensively. And at night she's used to sleeping with you. Even if I wanted to put her to bed, she'd just cry for you. I know you feel overwhelmed. But my entire paycheck goes into our joint account. You're tired from taking care of the kid, but I'm exhausted from climbing the corporate ladder. Can't we just understand each other? You think you're the only one tired from working? I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Fine. I will keep my job. You resign and stay home with Chloe. I don't mind the stress of being the sole breadwinner. We can't do that. Richard blurted out instantly. Why not? I challenged. Richard frowned, his patience wearing thin. Anna, be rational. Where in America do you see a grown man abandoning his career to be a stay-at-home dad while his wife works? Besides, I make more money than you. What is your paycheck really going to do for us? I let out a cold, cynical laugh. You make exactly $1,000 more a month than I do. And if I hadn't taken a step back in my career to give birth to your child and manage this household, I would have been promoted to regional director by now. I'd be making $150,000 a year, significantly more than your current salary. Richard's face darkened. He knew I was right, but his ego couldn't handle the blow. Realizing that pushing me too hard would only escalate the fight, he softened his voice, trying to manipulate my emotions. Anna, you love Chloe so much. You know I'm terrible at the domestic stuff. I only suggested you quit because I know deep down you'd never trust anyone else with her care. I stared at him quietly. This man whose handsome features I had once fallen deeply in love with now looked utterly repulsive to me. Richard, I said, pronouncing each syllable with razor-sharp clarity. I am not quitting my job. Chloe is not just my responsibility. What happens to her from now on is something you need to figure out. Either you quit, or you let your mother figure it out on her own. Without waiting for his response, I grabbed my purse from the hospital chair. I didn't look at the crib. I didn't look back at all. I turned on my heel and walked briskly down the hospital corridor. Anna, where are you going? Richard shouted after me. The commotion woke Chloe. The familiar sound of my 4-year-old daughter wailing echoed down the hall. Anna, Chloe is awake. She is looking for you. She is crying for her mom. Hearing his desperate shouts, I only walked faster. Tears streamed down my face, hot and furious. But I never once turned my head. I would never ever forget the day my own daughter demanded a DNA test. I would never forget the way she called his mistress Mom, plotting with the rest of this toxic family to keep me in the dark. I would never forget the vicious, hateful look on her face during the divorce, telling me she didn't want my broken genetics. She claimed I was the toxic one. But the truth was, she didn't have a single drop of my resilience, gratitude, or loyalty. The vanity, the selfishness, the absolute lack of empathy, those traits belonged entirely to her father and her grandmother. When Chloe was 4, she was diagnosed with a rare genetic metabolic disorder. Her body was fundamentally incapable of properly metabolizing certain sugars and carbohydrates, which triggered a cascade of severe physical reactions. If left unmanaged, the condition would inevitably lead to severe neurological damage, motor skill impairment, and cognitive decline. Eventually, she would become entirely dependent on others, losing her ability to function independently. I was the first one to notice that something was terribly wrong. It started with severe gastrointestinal issues. Every time Chloe ate regular meals, she would suffer from intense bouts of vomiting and diarrhea. It progressively grew worse. She ran chronic, unexplained fevers, and the whites of her eyes were constantly laced with thick, angry red veins. At the time, Richard and Margaret brushed it off. "It is just a stomach bug," Margaret would declare dismissively. "Kids get fevers. You're just being dramatic, Anna." When we took her to the local suburban pediatric clinic, the doctor there also assumed it was a standard viral infection. He prescribed some basic antibiotics and anti-nausea medication, and sent us on our way. When we got home, my husband and mother-in-law rolled their eyes, chiding me for making a mountain out of a molehill, but my maternal instinct screamed that something was deeply wrong. I couldn't sleep. I obsessively monitored her breathing. Finally, ignoring their complaints about the medical bills, I drove Chloe across the state to a top-tier children's research hospital. It was there, after a grueling battery of tests, that the specialists delivered the crushing diagnosis: a spontaneous genetic mutation affecting her sugar metabolism. Why did her genes mutate? I had sobbed in the doctor's office, holding my frail child. Is it hereditary, or is it because I ate jalapenos and sugary donuts during my pregnancy? Ever since Chloe was born sickly and frail, Margaret had waged a psychological war against me. Every single day, she hammered into my head that my pregnancy diet was to blame, because I had craved spicy Mexican food and the occasional glazed donut. Margaret insisted I had poisoned the baby in the womb. Later, when Chloe suffered from recurring fevers, Margaret doubled down. She loudly condemned me to anyone who would listen, claiming I lacked self-control. She even blamed me for the way I handled my postpartum recovery. It had been the dead of August, over 95 degrees outside, and Margaret had demanded we keep the air conditioning off. She wanted the baby bundled in thick flannel onesies, a knit cap, and socks, citing old wives' tales about catching a chill. I had furiously refused, stripping the heavy clothes off my sweating infant, and turning on the AC, which had thoroughly enraged Margaret. From that day on, any time Chloe spat up, or got the sniffles, Margaret would point a dramatic finger at me and shout, "See, I told you. You let the baby get exposed to cold air, and now look what you've done. Are you happy now?" We argued constantly over this. Deep down, I had believed I was following modern medical advice. But the relentless gaslighting had chipped away at my sanity. Sitting in the specialist's office, I was terrified that Margaret had been right all along. Dr. Evans, the pediatric geneticist, had looked at me with profound sympathy. "Anna, you have a college degree. You shouldn't let old superstitions cloud your logic. Do you know what a genetic mutation is? This is a chromosomal alteration at the microscopic level. It has absolutely nothing to do with whether you ate spicy food or donuts." Still panicking, I had choked out. "But, could the sugar have caused the DNA to break?" Dr. Evans sighed gently. "If eating a jalapeno or a donut could mutate human DNA, the entire global population would be walking around with severe genetic anomalies. The causes of spontaneous mutations are incredibly complex. Often, it is just a roll of the biological dice. It is just bad luck. What we need to do now is run a full genetic panel on both you and your husband, to see if either of you are recessive carriers, which will tell us if this is hereditary." When I brought this news home, Margaret threw a massive tantrum in the living room. "It must be your side of the family," she shrieked, beating her chest. "My son is handsome, tall, and went to an Ivy League university. You just went to a state school. It is definitely your inferior genetics that ruined my granddaughter." "The doctor said it's a spontaneous mutation," I yelled back, tears of frustration in my eyes. "It's an accident of nature." "Accident, my foot. Genes don't just mutate for no reason. Either your bloodline is tainted, or you poisoned her by eating garbage while you were pregnant." I was so blinded by rage, I thought I would pass out. We had a massive house-shaking screaming match until Richard finally stepped in to play the peacemaker, begging us both to calm down. A week later, the comprehensive exome sequencing and chromosomal microarray results came back. The tests had cost us thousands of dollars out of pocket. The results were definitive. Both Richard and I had perfectly normal genes. Chloe's disease was a de novo mutation. It had originated entirely on its own. The silver lining was that it wasn't a death sentence. Dr. Evans explained that with pharmaceutical intervention, incredibly strict dietary control, and rigorous daily physical therapy to maintain her motor skills, Chloe's symptoms would drastically improve once she hit puberty, but managing the diet was a monumental task. No standard carbs, absolutely no sugar, and a highly specialized macronutrient balance. At the time, Richard and I were both working full-time. My mother had originally helped us. But when my brother had his first child, she moved away to help him. That left Margaret to watch Chloe. Margaret was, to put it bluntly, incredibly lazy. Whenever I was home, she would immediately drop whatever she was doing, retreat to the couch, and leave all the cooking, cleaning, and childcare to me. Meanwhile, Richard's office was an hour's commute away, and he constantly worked overtime or traveled for business, making him practically useless at home. Knowing how serious Chloe's condition was, I typed up a highly detailed color-coded list of dietary restrictions and pinned it to the fridge. I begged Margaret to be careful, emphasizing that even hidden sugars could cause neurological damage. That very evening, I came home from work and found Margaret spooning a bowl of sweetened instant oatmeal into Chloe's mouth. I dropped my briefcase, sprinting across the kitchen to smack the spoon away. "What are you doing?" I screamed. Margaret glared at me, offended. "What is wrong with you? I'm feeding her oatmeal. It is healthy. I told you this morning," I shouted, gesturing wildly at the fridge. "Oatmeal is packed with carbohydrates. It breaks down into pure glucose in her system. She cannot have this." Margaret slammed the bowl onto the counter, shattering it. "Nonsense. It doesn't even taste sweet. There's no sugar in it. You just hate me and want to pick a fight over everything I do. Fine. If I'm so horrible, you can take care of the brat yourself. I'm done." She grabbed her coat, stormed out of the house, and slammed the front door so hard the picture frames rattled. "Fine, don't help, I'll do it myself," I screamed at the closed door. My blood was boiling. I couldn't trust this woman with my daughter's life. Chloe required absolute vigilance. Her food had to be weighed and prepared from scratch. She needed someone to massage her muscles daily and guide her through specialized physical therapy routines to ensure her cognitive and physical development didn't fall behind. I couldn't afford a specialized medical nanny, and I couldn't trust Margaret, so I made the only choice a terrified, desperate mother could make. I drafted my resignation letter that night and became a full-time stay-at-home mom. At the time, I truly believed I was doing the right thing. I never anticipated the devastating consequences that single decision would have on the rest of my life. With my salary gone, the entire financial weight of our suburban American life fell squarely on Richard's shoulders. The mortgage on our 4-bedroom house, the 2 car payments, the cripplingly high monthly expenses for Chloe's specialized imported foods and medical treatments. And as the financial pressure mounted, so did Richard's temper. When we were dating, Richard was charming, attentive, and catered to my every whim. We had been wildly in love. But after we got married, the reality of a mortgage and the constant interference from his mother began to chip away at our romance. Once I became a stay-at-home mom, the power dynamic shifted entirely. He was the sole provider, and he never let me forget it. He was drowning in stress from work, and we began to have explosive arguments over the smallest things. But at the core of every single fight was one thing: money. Poverty and financial stress are the graveyards of romance. To ease the burden, I dedicated myself to extreme frugality. Aside from guiding Chloe through her physical therapy 3 times a day, and doing cognitive exercises to keep her on par with her peers, my only other focus was saving pennies. I stopped buying clothes entirely. I learned how to cut my own hair from YouTube tutorials. I gave up my gym membership, my book club, and every single hobby I had. Because Chloe's specialized diet was so expensive, I cooked her pristine, nutrient-dense meals from scratch, while I practically starved myself, eating the cheapest discounted canned goods, and whatever leftovers Richard didn't want. I stretched myself to the absolute breaking point, and for a while, the sacrifice seemed worth it. By the time Chloe entered elementary school, she looked and behaved just like any other healthy child. Dr. Evans was amazed, confirming that her development was perfectly on track. But as she grew older, a new, far more insidious problem began to emerge. Chloe developed a social life, She started noticing what the other kids were eating at school. She developed a desperate craving for snacks, candy, and normalcy. She developed vanity. Margaret had eventually moved back to her own house a few towns over. But she hated being alone. Using the excuse of visiting her granddaughter, she constantly showed up at our house unannounced. Richard had given her a spare key, which she used to waltz in whenever she pleased, inevitably overstaying her welcome. It wouldn't have been so bad if she just visited. But the moment she walked through the door, the interrogations began. "Oh my lord. Look at this hardwood floor. When was the last time you vacuumed? Why is there leftover casserole in the fridge? You're wasting my son's hard-earned money. Chloe's shirt has a stain on it. Why haven't you changed her? What exactly do you do all day?" In her eyes, because I wasn't bringing in a paycheck, I was expected to maintain a spotless, Pinterest-perfect house, act as a Michelin star chef, be a full-time medical nurse, and serve her like a maid whenever she visited. I thought about divorcing Richard countless times during those years. But I couldn't bear the thought of leaving Chloe. At the time, the idea of abandoning my child was unthinkable to me. A mother's heart is too soft. I was terrified that if we divorced and Richard got custody, his misogynistic, careless family would neglect her medical needs, and her life would be destroyed. But fighting for full custody was financially impossible. How could I afford rent, medical bills, and childcare on a minimum wage job after being out of the workforce for years? So, I stayed. And Margaret kept using the excuse of helping out to linger around. I caught her whispering poison into Chloe's ear, on multiple occasions, telling the young girl how mean and lazy I was. It resulted in endless screaming matches. There was rarely a day of peace in that house. Worse, Margaret would secretly take Chloe out to the convenience store and buy her candy bars and chips. Whenever I caught them, I would completely lose my mind. I would snatch the candy out of Chloe's hands and throw it straight into the garbage disposal, strictly forbidding her from eating a single bite. To a child, my behavior seemed utterly hysterical and tyrannical. People love to say that there are no bad children, only bad parents. But you can only truly understand the sheer helplessness of parenting when you've been in the trenches, especially when you are a mother with zero financial power, fighting a solitary war to keep your child alive, while your own family actively sabotages you. Richard and Margaret had the money. They bought her the toys, they bought her the forbidden snacks, and they played the roles of the fun-loving family members. Meanwhile, I was the warden. I was the one constantly barking, "Don't touch that. You can't eat that. Do your physical therapy." Over time, Chloe's heart shifted completely. In her eyes, her dad and grandma were absolute angels. I was the evil witch. She stopped listening to me. Even when it came to her own health, she would stubbornly refuse to comply, unless I screamed myself hoarse. She truly believed I was just a crazy control freak, making a big deal out of nothing. Yes, the chronic stress made me lose my temper. Yes, there were times I overreacted. But 99% of the time, I was fighting to save her life. Yet, all my efforts only made her hate me more. "I'm only sick because you couldn't control your appetite when you were pregnant," she screamed at me one day when she was 10. "You ate spicy tacos and sugary donuts. Grandma said you exposed me to the freezing AC when I was a baby. This is all your fault." I felt sickened to my core by the sheer injustice of it. When she turned 11, she demanded a smartphone. I vehemently opposed it, knowing she wasn't mature enough to handle unrestricted internet access. But Richard, desperate to buy her affection and avoid dealing with her tantrums, bought her an iPhone behind my back. From that day on, Chloe vanished into the digital world, hopelessly addicted to TikTok, Instagram, and mobile games. And the algorithm, sensing her teenage angst, began to feed her exactly what she wanted to see. The algorithms of social media are ruthlessly efficient. They feed you exactly what you engage with, creating an echo chamber of your own darkest thoughts. When Chloe got her iPhone, she began searching for phrases like controlling mother and toxic parenting. Instantly, her feeds were flooded with anti-parenting propaganda, videos about escaping toxic households, and influencers urging teenagers to go no contact with strict parents. To a naive, resentful child, this digital brainwashing was absolute gospel. She viewed me not as a mother trying to save her life, but as a tyrant meant to be overthrown. Our relationship deteriorated into a cold, hostile war. By the time Chloe was in the 3rd grade, Richard had steadily climbed the corporate ladder. His company promoted him to a vice president role, and his annual compensation skyrocketed to over $500,000. But I didn't know that. He deliberately hid his financial success from me. He deposited a strict allowance of $2,000 into our joint account every month, claiming money was tight. He forced me to stretch every penny to cover groceries, utilities, and Chloe's exorbitant out-of-pocket medical expenses. Meanwhile, he was secretly spending thousands on paid companions and lavish dinners with young partners. I had my suspicions noticing the late nights and the mysterious credit card charges, but I lacked the resources to hire a private investigator or access his locked accounts. Desperate for financial independence, I had tried to re-enter the workforce, but Chloe's condition required military-like precision. Even though she was in middle school, the school cafeteria couldn't accommodate her strict macronutrient needs. I had to cook her specialized hot lunches from scratch and deliver them to the campus every single day. I also had to guide her through her physical therapy routines every morning and evening. With a child whose immune system was compromised, meaning constant emergency room visits for sudden fevers, no corporate employer wanted a 35-year-old woman with a decade-long gap on her resume and zero schedule flexibility. I eventually took a night shift job stocking shelves at a local supermarket, scavenging discounted bruised produce to take home, just so I could save a few extra dollars for Chloe's college fund. When Chloe finally reached high school, her metabolic condition stabilized, just as Dr. Evans had predicted. The dietary restrictions eased significantly, and the intense physical therapy was no longer required 3 times a day. I thought I could finally breathe. I thought the worst years of my life were behind me. I couldn't have been more wrong. That was when Sarah entered the picture. Sarah was a wealthy, glamorous divorcee with a son of her own. Richard became dangerously obsessed with her. He wanted to marry her, behind my back. Richard began taking Chloe to meet Sarah. To my absolute horror, my own daughter kept this a secret from me. While I was working grueling night shifts in a freezing supermarket warehouse, wearing cheap, thrifted clothes, Richard was taking Chloe, Margaret, and Sarah out to Michelin-starred restaurants. Under the guise of visiting out-of-state relatives, they took luxury vacations to Aspen and Hawaii. Playing the perfect happy blended family, they all conspired to keep me entirely in the dark. It wasn't until Chloe's sophomore year that I accidentally discovered a photo on her iPad, a picture of the 4 of them smiling on a yacht. The betrayal shattered me. When I confronted Chloe, weeping and hyperventilating, she didn't offer a single word of comfort. Instead, she looked at me with pure disgust and demanded we take a DNA test. "Why?" I had whispered, my voice trembling. "Because I'm beautiful, talented, and smart," she sneered. "And you are just a fat, ugly, miserable woman who does nothing but yell at me. There is no way you are my real mother. I bet there was a mix-up at the hospital. My real mom should be someone elegant like Aunt Sarah." Her words were like serrated blades twisting in my chest. "If I wasn't your mother, why would I have sacrificed my career to keep you alive?" I sobbed. "You used to blame my pregnancy diet for your disease. You know I'm your mother." "Whatever. I want proof," she demanded coldly. Furious and broken, I dragged her to a genetic testing clinic. When the results confirmed I was her biological mother, she didn't apologize. She broke down in hysterical tears. "No, it is impossible. I refuse to inherit your trash genetics." She claimed my genetics were garbage. She said her father was handsome, successful, and youthful, while I was aging, overweight, and poor. She was terrified that my inferior DNA would make her ugly. Genetics. I stared at her, my heart turning to ash. For years I had blamed Margaret for turning her against me. I had made excuses for her, telling myself she was just a rebellious kid. But in that moment, I realized the terrifying truth about genetics. No matter how much love you pour into them, no matter how much you sacrifice, a child born with the selfish, Cold-blooded DNA of a narcissist will always be a monster. She didn't just have a mutated metabolism. Her very soul was mutated. Even Richard, as vile as he was, defended his own mother. But Chloe didn't even want her own mother. When Richard formally filed for divorce, demanding I leave the house with absolutely nothing so he could marry Sarah, Chloe stood firmly by his side. Richard had spent years funneling his assets into offshore accounts and putting properties in his mother's and Sarah's names. Legally, I was destitute, desperate. I tried to play the emotional card. Chloe, I am your mother. I gave up my entire life for you. She rolled her eyes, cutting me off. Oh, here we go again with the guilt trip. What exactly did you sacrifice? You were just a useless housewife who didn't earn a single dime. You begged Dad for money every month. You think doing some laundry makes you a martyr. Nobody asked for your sacrifices. The color drained from my face. My soul died in that living room, numb, broken, and completely hollow. I had stumbled out into the pouring rain, wandering the streets, until the blaring horn of a speeding truck ended my misery. And then, by some cruel or merciful twist of fate, I opened my eyes outside the hospital, right back to the year Chloe was 4. Walking away from the hospital, the chaotic memories of my past life settled into a cold diamond-hard resolve in my chest. I wiped the remaining tears from my cheeks. The plan was simple: divorce Richard. And absolutely, under no circumstances, take custody of Chloe. Whoever wanted that ungrateful, backstabbing leech could have her. I ordered an Uber and headed back to our sprawling suburban subdivision. As I walked down the manicured sidewalk toward our block, passing the neighborhood community park, I heard a painfully familiar, dramatic wail. Oh, what sin did I commit in my past life to deserve this? Margaret was howling. She was sitting on a park bench, surrounded by 3 or 4 of the neighborhood housewives, putting on a theatrical performance. I told her not to eat those spicy jalapeno tacos. I begged her to put down the sugary Starbucks drinks when she was pregnant. I told her to put a hat on the baby during postpartum. But she wouldn't listen, and now look. My poor innocent granddaughter has a severe genetic disease. It is all Anna's fault. I stopped in my tracks. Richard had obviously called her from the hospital to give her the test results. Unable to cope with the reality of a sick grandchild, she immediately ran to the neighborhood gossip circle to play the victim and pin the blame squarely on me. I walked right up to the bench. What exactly do you think you're doing? Margaret jumped, wiping away her fake tears as she turned to face me. Emboldened by her audience, she raised her voice. I'm telling them the truth. You ruined that child. Do you have any idea how much money my son is going to have to spend to keep her alive? It's all your fault. The pediatric geneticist literally just explained that it's a spontaneous genetic mutation, and you are out here trying to frame me for it. I demanded, my voice echoing across the quiet park. If it wasn't you, then who was it? Margaret shrieked, pointing a crooked finger at my face. It is because of the garbage you ate. Oh really? I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. Millions of women eat spicy food and drink coffee during pregnancy, and their kids are perfectly fine. I drank a frappuccino twice, and suddenly I mutated my child's DNA. I don't blame you for being uneducated, Margaret. But you are actively choosing to be malicious and ignorant. And I am not going to tolerate it anymore. In my past life, I had cared too much about keeping up appearances. I had swallowed my pride to maintain the illusion of a happy suburban family. I never would have caused a scene in public, but in this life, I was ready to burn it all down. What did you just say? Margaret gasped, her eyes bugging out. She thrust her fingers so close to my face it almost poked my eye. Did you just call me ignorant? A surge of pure, unadulterated rage 20 years in the making boiled over. I didn't even think. I just swung. Clap. The sound of my palm connecting with her cheek echoed like a gunshot. Keep pointing that finger at me, you old bat, I roared. You want to talk about whose fault it is? What about the fact that you secretly fed a newborn baby solid rice cereal, when the doctor specifically said she could only digest breast milk? What about the times you snuck her sugar when I wasn't looking? If anyone caused her body to mutate, It was you actively harming her. Throwing baseless accusations around was a game two could play. For nearly 2 decades I had tolerated this woman. I had cooked for her, cleaned up after her, and endured her endless verbal abuse because I needed Richard's paycheck and occasionally needed her to watch the baby, so I could sleep for 2 hours. She had taken my desperation and used it to step on my neck. Never again. Ah, she struck me, Margaret wailed, clutching her rapidly reddening cheek. She looked around at the housewives, expecting them to jump to her defense, but they were entirely frozen in shock. I stepped forward and delivered a second equally firm strike to the other side of her face. Clap. Yes, I struck you, and I'll do it again, I yelled, leaning over her. You lazy, toxic parasite. Every time you claim to help with the baby, you just sit on the couch and bark orders while I do all the work. You ruin everything you touch. Margaret, realizing her victim routine wasn't working, dropped the act. Her face contorted with rage, and she lunged forward, raising her hands to scratch my face. Did this frail, brittle woman really think she could take me in a fight? Before she could even make contact, I raised my leg and planted a firm front kick directly into her stomach. Margaret flew backward, crashing spectacularly into the community's perfectly manicured rhododendron bushes. She thrashed around in the branches, shrieking at the top of her lungs, "Help, cruelty. My daughter-in-law is trying to harm me. Call the police." I stood on the sidewalk looking down at her with absolute zero empathy. "Keep screaming. Let's see if anyone actually cares," she screamed, louder. "You're staying in those bushes because you think you can sue me for a payout, right?" I taunted. "Go ahead, sue me. Ask for $50,000. I'll just call your son and make him pay for it. After all, we're legally married. His money is my money." Margaret's screaming abruptly choked off. After a few seconds of calculating silence, she spat. "I'll call the cops. I'll have you thrown in jail for physical attack." "Please do," I smiled widely. "I would love to go to jail. If I am locked up, I don't have to cook. I don't have to clean. And I certainly don't have to take care of a severely chronically ill toddler. Guess who will have to do all of that? You. You'll be the one waking up every 2 hours. You'll be the one doing the physical therapy. You'll be the one serving your son. So please, call 911 right now. I'll wait." Margaret's face went pale. She wasn't a legal scholar, but she knew exactly what my absence would mean for her comfortable, lazy life. I gave her one last look of utter disgust, adjusted my purse, and walked away, leaving her tangled in the landscaping. Margaret was humiliated beyond belief, but she stubbornly remained in the bushes for a few more minutes, hoping someone would come to her aid. There were several women standing right there, but not a single one stepped forward to help her up. Margaret had spent months gossiping behind my back, trying to win the sympathy of the older conservative neighbors, but she had completely alienated the younger generation of mothers in our subdivision. What modern woman hasn't had a cup of coffee or spicy food during her pregnancy? By blaming Chloe's disease on my diet, Margaret had insulted half the mothers in the neighborhood. They all secretly despised her. As I walked away, I heard Margaret complaining to one of the onlookers. "You saw her attack me. Why didn't you do anything?" The younger woman simply backed away, holding her hands up. "Look, your daughter-in-law seems really crazy right now. I'm not getting involved. She might strike me too." I almost laughed out loud. The woman clearly just didn't want to help Margaret and was using me as a convenient excuse. It was comforting to know that not everyone in the world was as blind and toxic as Richard's family. Putting Margaret in her place felt incredibly cathartic. In my past life, I had always held back because I had a massive vulnerability, my unconditional love for my daughter. I didn't want to cause a rift in the family because I thought Chloe needed a stable home, but things were different now. I didn't have a vulnerability anymore. Nobody could use my love as a weapon against me, because I had severed that emotional cord. Margaret couldn't extort me for money, and she certainly wouldn't send me to jail, because she was terrified of actually having to do the physical labor of raising Chloe. She had no choice but to swallow the punishment. I let myself into our townhouse and poured a glass of ice water. Not 10 minutes later, the front door violently slammed open, Margaret had managed to extract herself from the bushes. She stormed down the hallway, standing outside my bedroom door, screaming curses at the top of her lungs. "You ungrateful wretch. It is absolute terrible karma that we let you marry into this family. I came all the way out here to help you raise this brat, and you lay hands on me. Don't you ever expect me to lift a finger to help you again?" I threw the bedroom door open, stepping right into her personal space. "Help me, let me ask you a question. Is this child exclusively mine? Your son swore on our wedding day that we would be equal partners in parenting. But what is the reality? I work, and he works. Yet when I get home, I do all the cooking, cleaning and child-rearing. I stay up all night, rocking a sick baby. What exactly does your son do besides throw a little money at the mortgage? You aren't helping me, Margaret. You're covering for your irresponsible son." Before she could form a rebuttal, I slammed the door shut in her face. She continued to wail and bang on the wood, but I completely ignored her, putting on a pair of noise-canceling headphones. About an hour later, I heard the heavy thud of the front door. Richard had finally come home from the hospital, carrying Chloe in his arms. Margaret immediately rushed to the entryway, launching into a tearful hysterical recounting of how I had viciously attacked her in the park. Richard set Chloe down on the living room sofa, looking exhausted and overwhelmed by the sheer volume of his mother's shrieking. "She struck me. You have to strike her back, Richard. Show her who is the man of this house. If you don't put her in her place, she is going to walk all over us," Margaret demanded, grabbing his arm and shaking it. Moments later, Richard was pounding on my bedroom door. "Anna, open this door. How could you physically attack my mother?" he roared. I ripped the door open, my eyes blazing with cold fire. "She insulted me in front of the entire neighborhood. She has been slandering me for months, telling everyone that my diet gave Chloe a genetic mutation. I warned her. I am done being her punching bag." "She is an elder," Richard yelled, his face turning red. "No matter what she says, you don't put your hands on her. Being old doesn't give you a free pass to be a toxic sociopath." I shot back. If she acted like a decent human being, she wouldn't have gotten struck. As Richard and I screamed at each other in the hallway, a small movement caught my eye. On the living room sofa, Chloe's eyelids fluttered open. She groggily pushed herself up into a sitting position. "Dad, Grandma," she murmured, her 4-year-old voice thick with sleep. She rubbed her eyes and looked closely at Richard and Margaret. "Why do you guys look so young?" The words hit me like a physical blow. I stopped arguing and stared at her. Chloe looked around the living room, her confusion deepening. "Is this the old townhouse? Didn't we move to the mansion? Why are we back here?" The air in the room seemed to freeze. A chill ran down my spine, followed instantly by a wave of dark, cynical clarity. Chloe was reborn too. In my past life, after Richard was promoted and started making $500,000 a year, he secretly bought a massive luxury estate. He put the deed in his mistress Sarah's name, to hide it from me in the divorce. When he finally kicked me out, he moved Chloe, Margaret, and Sarah into that mansion. They lived there like royalty, while I was left rotting in this cramped old townhouse. A 4-year-old Chloe wouldn't know anything about a mansion. Only the teenage Chloe, the one who had gleefully participated in throwing me out onto the street, would remember that house. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. Oh, this was perfect. She had reincarnated. She was trapped back in her 4-year-old body, just as she was diagnosed with her brutal, unforgiving rare disease. In her past life, I had been her shield. I had meticulously managed her diet, forced her through painful physical therapy, and absorbed all the stress and financial ruin, so she could live a normal life. But this time, I wouldn't lift a finger. She worshipped her father and her grandmother so much. Fine. Let her experience exactly what a living hell it was to rely on those two selfish narcissists for her survival. Let's see how much they really loved her, when the burden fell entirely on their shoulders. Seeing my total lack of remorse, Margaret escalated her performance, weeping loudly. "Is there no justice in this world? Look at her. She is standing there smiling. She is a monster." Richard, blinded by his bruised ego and his mother's instigation, completely lost his temper. If you won't apologize right now, Anna, I want a divorce. Great, I replied instantly, my voice crisp and even. Let's get it done today. Only a coward would back down now. Chloe, fully awake and realizing what was happening, scrambled off the couch. The mind of a teenager trapped in a toddler's body. She immediately ran to Richard, hugging his leg. Dad, if you and Mom divorce, I want to live with you. Get away from us. Margaret violently shoved the little girl backward. Who wants a sickly burden like you? Your disease is going to cost a fortune. It is your mother's fault. You're broken. So you're going with her. Don't think you can leech off my son's money. Chloe fell hard onto the carpet. She stared up at Margaret, her mouth hanging open in absolute shock. She had never in her previous life seen this side of her grandmother. To Chloe, Margaret was the fun grandma who bought her candy and let her watch TV when I was being the strict enforcer. Now faced with the reality of a lifelong medical and financial burden, the loving grandmother had instantly thrown her to the wolves. I looked down at Chloe, a mocking glint in my eye. Did you hear that, Chloe? If your father and I get divorced, who are you choosing to go with? Chloe recovered from her shock, her face hardening into the familiar resentful glare she used on me when she was 16. I'm obviously choosing Dad. Who would ever want to live with a controlling psycho like you? Excellent. In my past life, she had chosen him. In this life, she was choosing him again. I wasn't surprised in the slightest. There is an old saying, I told her quietly. It is better to follow a mother who begs on the streets than a wealthy father who doesn't care about you. Do you understand what that means? I had absolutely zero intention of fighting for custody. But I needed her to explicitly verbalize her choice in front of witnesses. When she inevitably suffered under their care, I didn't want her trying to emotionally blackmail me later. She sneered at me, crossing her little arms. Dad and Grandma are great. I'm staying with them, so you don't need to worry about me. As she spoke, she kept casting nervous glances at Richard, desperately trying to gauge his reaction and win his favor by tearing me down. She had always done this. She bullied me to win points with the true power holders in the house. Because Richard held the purse strings, she allied herself with the strongest predator in the room. I nodded slowly. You said it yourself. When your father decides he doesn't want to deal with your medical bills anymore, do not come looking for me. As far as I'm concerned, we are strangers to each other. She rolled her eyes. If you get divorced, you won't even have an allowance. Who are you going to beg for money? It is hilarious. You can't even afford to feed yourself, let alone me. You must be brain damaged to think I'd go with you. Hearing those exact familiar insults come out of her 4-year-old mouth, I actually laughed. I used to reject the concept of genetic determinism. I used to believe that a child was a blank slate, shaped entirely by love and parenting. Now I knew better. The blueprint was already drawn. When presented with two paths, one of discipline and one of indulgence, a child with their DNA would always choose the path of least resistance, regardless of the consequences. It seems that being incredibly foolish is a trait passed down through the Richard bloodline. I replied coolly. Who do I need to beg for money? I have a college degree. I have a job. I make my own salary. Do you ever use that brain of yours before you speak? Dad. Did you hear her? She is insulting me. Chloe whined, tugging on Richard's trousers. Richard didn't even look at her. Dad. She tried again, her voice wavering. Richard, already boiling with rage over the prospect of a messy divorce, snapped. Shut up. What gives a kid the right to butt into adult conversations? You're actually rejecting your own mother. Your brain must really be damaged from that disease. Get away from me and go stand by her. Chloe flinched, physically shrinking back from the terrifying, vein-popping anger on his face. She immediately clamped her mouth shut. In her past life, Chloe had spent almost all her time with me. I was the one forcing her to eat bland food, the one dragging her to doctors, the one losing my patience after 14 hours of chores. Richard, on the other hand, only saw her for an hour after work, always playing the relaxed, easygoing dad. She assumed he was emotionally stable, and I was the crazy one. The truth was, Richard's temper was vicious. He just never had to show it to her because I shielded her from it. Now, she was finally getting a front row seat to her father's true nature. Anna, you attacked my mother. Are you going to apologize or not? Richard demanded, still fixated on his wounded pride. Not in a million years, I said, spurred on by Margaret's dramatic weeping in the background. Richard roared. Then we're getting a divorce. Perfect, I said. We marched straight out of the house, getting into our separate cars, and drove to the county family court mediator's office. In the mediator's office, the reality of the situation finally hit them. If she wants a divorce, she takes the kid, Margaret demanded, slamming her hand on the mediator's table. Richard nodded eagerly. Anna, you love kids. Chloe is all yours. You want to dump your expensive medical burden on me? Absolutely not, I said calmly. I will sign the divorce papers right now, but I am giving up all parental rights. The mediator and the administrative clerks in the room looked at us in stunned silence. Their faces morphed into expressions of disgust. I knew exactly what they were thinking. Parents who abandon a sick child are the lowest form of people. I didn't care. Let them judge. Then we aren't divorcing, Richard said, suddenly realizing the trap he had walked into. Anna, let's just go home. Stop making a scene in public. Chloe, sensing the tension, immediately chimed in. Mom, please stop being so dramatic. Let's just go home. She spoke as if I was the one throwing a hysterical tantrum. I stood up, pushing my chair back loudly. Weren't you the one screaming for a divorce 20 minutes ago? How am I the one making a scene? I was just angry because you struck my mother. Richard tried to explain to the judging eyes of the room. My wife confronted my elderly mother. I was just reacting in the heat of the moment. I walked over to Margaret, who was sitting smugly in her chair, and without a second's hesitation, I struck her across the face in front of the mediator. Before anyone could react, I spun around and struck Richard directly across his jaw. I didn't just strike your mother. I'm striking you, you cowardly piece of trash. Are we divorcing or not? Richard grabbed his face, trembling with rage. Are you people seeing this? Look at this psycho. I struck his other cheek. Clap. Yes, I am a psycho. Divorce or not? Margaret shrieked and lunged at me. I grabbed a fistful of her hair and yanked her down, striking her wildly. You old wretch. Spreading rumors about me. Calling me names. When I think about the literal mistreatment you put me through postpartum, I want to harm you. You lazy, useless parasite. Divorce or not? Enough. We're divorcing. Richard screamed, pulling us apart. You want a divorce, fine. But you are taking the kid. Chloe already said she wants to stay with you, I said, smoothing my shirt. Chloe backed away from me, hiding behind Richard. I want my dad. My mom mistreats me. I won't go with her. See, I told Richard. Panic set in Richard's eyes. He wanted to punish me with a divorce, but he was absolutely terrified of being left alone with a sick child who required constant medical care. If you don't take the kid, I'm not signing anything, he declared, storming out of the room. Margaret cursed at me, calling me every vile name in the book before scurrying after him. I watched them leave, completely unfazed. I knew he wouldn't agree to it so easily. If I left, who would be their unpaid medical nurse, chef and maid? His lazy mother. He knew the reality of his situation, which was why he was trying to hold me hostage in the marriage. But I didn't love Chloe anymore. He could drag out the legal process as long as he wanted. It wouldn't force me to care. I drove back to the townhouse before they arrived, packed 2 large suitcases of my clothes and essentials, and walked out, just like Richard had done to me countless times in my past life. I washed my hands of the mess and walked away. I rented a sleek downtown apartment that afternoon. I went shopping, buying new clothes, high-end skincare, and a few pieces of jewelry. I also wired a chunk of my savings to my mother, tagging the transfer as childcare reimbursement from past years. Richard and I didn't have much liquid cash right now, as most of our money went to the mortgage and Chloe's early medical bills. I used to save every penny for them. Now, I was spending every last dime on myself. My phone lit up with dozens of missed calls and furious texts from Richard. I blocked his number. I sat down at my new kitchen island, opened my laptop, and began drafting a formal complaint for a contested divorce to file with the state court. From this moment on, I would live for myself. A contested divorce in the United States is a notoriously agonizing, drawn-out process. When one party refuses to cooperate, the legal system moves at a glacial pace, between mandatory cooling-off periods, mediation sessions, and endless discovery requests. Richard was deliberately dragging his feet to keep me financially trapped and bound to my role as his family's unpaid servant. I didn't care. I continued to live in my new apartment, going to my job and enjoying the profound peace of a silent, clean home. One afternoon, during my lunch break, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered it, and Chloe's arrogant, adolescent tone came through the speaker, sounding utterly bizarre coming from a 4-year-old's vocal cords. "Mom, did you reincarnate too? Otherwise, why would you suddenly want a divorce?" I paused, leaning back in my chair. "So it is you. What do you want?" Chloe sighed dramatically, as if she were the exhausted parent dealing with a toddler. "You're still mad that I didn't take your side during the divorce in our last life. It's honestly pathetic. Have you ever stopped to reflect on your own behavior? You were constantly screaming, constantly controlling me. You never admitted when you were wrong." "Get to the point," I snapped. Chloe, clearly not expecting me to be this cold, stuttered for a second before huffing angrily. "Stop throwing a tantrum, and come home to cook for me." "Excuse me, cook for me?" she demanded, her tone dripping with entitlement. "I have a metabolic disease. Someone has to prepare my special meals." I actually laughed out loud. "You want me to be your personal chef? Why don't you ask your beloved father or grandmother to do it?" "They don't know how," Chloe complained. "Neither did I shot back. I spent hours reading medical journals and learning how to cook for your condition. They can learn too. I'm not your servant." I hung up and blocked the number. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that getting angry over a parasitic narcissist was a waste of energy. Instead, I focused on securing my future. That weekend, I drove out of state to visit my own mother. Under the guise of needing an account for a freelance business, I had her open a new checking account in her name, with a passcode only I knew. Over the next few weeks, I quietly began withdrawing my salary in cash and depositing it into this account. But I needed to move more money, and I needed to do it legally, so it wouldn't be flagged as hiding assets during the divorce discovery phase. I contacted a close friend of mine, Jessica, who owned a high-end artisan bakery and boutique downtown. After confiding in her about my impending divorce from my cheating husband, she enthusiastically agreed to help me. Every week, I would place exorbitant orders at her bakery, paying $500 for a $20 box of pastries. Jessica would process the payment, keep the cost of the food, and wire the remaining cash directly to the account under my mother's name. To complete the illusion of regular spending, I had those pastries delivered directly to Richard's house for Chloe. In our past life, I had ruthlessly restricted her access to sweets, which she resented me for. This time, I was playing the role of the generous distant mother. Whether she ate them or not, I didn't care. As far as the bank statements showed, I was just a mother spoiling her sick child. The money was effectively relocated. With the funds safely in my mother's account, I invested heavily in the stock market. Having lived through the next 15 years, I knew exactly which tech giants and index funds would skyrocket, and which real estate bubbles would burst. By the time I reached my 40s, I would be independently wealthy. Meanwhile, back at the suburban townhouse, Margaret was living a nightmare. Without me there, the crushing weight of domestic labor fell entirely on her shoulders. At first, terrified of Richard's anger, she tried to follow the doctor's dietary guidelines for Chloe, but Margaret was inherently lazy. After 3 days of meticulously weighing proteins and boiling unseasoned vegetables, she gave up. She started cooking regular family meals, macaroni and cheese, casseroles, pizza, and told Chloe, "Eat it or starve." I'm not running a restaurant. Chloe, possessing the mind of a teenager, but the impulse control of a child, was thrilled. In her past life she had despised my strict rules. Now, she was free. She ate the carbs. She devoured the pastries I sent. She stopped doing her daily physical therapy. because Margaret was too lazy to enforce it, and Chloe herself hated the exercises. A mutual friend from the neighborhood called me a few weeks later, sounding panicked. "Anna, are you really not coming back? Do you know what your mother-in-law is feeding Chloe?" I saw her eating a massive slice of chocolate cake on the porch. I smiled softly into the phone. Since her father and grandmother are the ones in charge, it is really none of my business. "But Anna, she is your daughter, her disease. She made her choice during the mediation," I replied coldly. I cannot force help upon people who actively want to destroy themselves. Despite my financial maneuvering, the legal battle for the divorce was stalling. I needed a decisive strike to force Richard's hand. I packed a small overnight bag and drove back to the townhouse. The moment I walked through the door, Margaret rushed into the hallway, her face twisting into a smug, venomous sneer. "Oh, look who decided to come crawling back. I knew you wouldn't survive on your own. You need my son's money too much." Chloe walked out of her bedroom, crossing her arms. "I thought you were going to be this strong, independent woman. Guess reality hit you hard, huh?" I ignored them both, walking straight into the kitchen. That evening, I cooked a massive elaborate dinner, rich steaks, buttery mashed potatoes and roasted vegetables. Chloe walked in, eyeing the food. "You don't need to make me a separate plate," she announced arrogantly. "I've been eating normal food for 2 months, and I feel perfectly fine." I didn't even look up from the stove. "I didn't make you a separate plate. Don't flatter yourself," Chloe scowled. "So you finally admit that you were being completely hysterical before. Forcing me to eat that disgusting bland food was just a power trip for you." "Sure," I said flatly. "I was wrong. You do whatever you want." When Richard got home, he was ecstatic to see me cooking. He had recently been shortlisted for a highly coveted 6-month overseas assignment in London. If he took it, a promotion to senior VP and a massive bonus were guaranteed. But he couldn't go if he was trapped at home dealing with a sick kid and a divorce. Seeing me back in the kitchen, he thought I had finally broken. He even bought a bouquet of grocery store roses, playing the role of the loving, forgiving husband. During dinner, I poured him a heavy glass of expensive scotch. Believing he had won the psychological war, he eagerly drank it. I kept refilling his glass, playing the part of a defeated, submissive wife. By 10 p.m., Richard was completely unconscious, snoring heavily on the guest bed. I walked into the room, took his right hand, and pressed his thumb against the sensor of his iPhone. The screen unlocked immediately. In my past life, Richard had thrown his infidelities in my face during the divorce, boasting about how he had hired paid companions whenever the stress of Chloe's illness became too much. I knew exactly what I was looking for. I scrolled through his contacts and found a saved number under supplier Jake. I opened the text thread. It wasn't a corporate supplier, it was a local escort dispatcher. The chat history was explicit messages, price negotiations, requests for specific acts, and hotel room numbers spanning the last 3 years. I took screenshots of everything, but I didn't stop there. Richard was an arrogant narcissist who thought he was smarter than everyone in his corporate office. I dug into his WhatsApp group chats with his college frat brothers. Sure enough, I found gold. Richard had spent months violently trashing his CEO and the executive board. He called his boss a bald, incompetent moron, shared highly sensitive corporate secrets, mocked the company's diversity initiatives with slurs, and bragged about expensing personal luxury dinners to the corporate account. I airdropped every single screenshot to my own phone, then emailed them to a secure server. The next morning, I dressed in a sharp blazer and drove straight to Richard's corporate headquarters. I waited for him in the lobby. When he walked through the sliding glass doors, holding his briefcase and a coffee, his eyes widened in shock. "Anna, what the hell are you doing here?" I walked up to him, my expression lethal. "We are going to finalize the divorce today, Richard." His face flushed with anger. He grabbed my arm and pulled me into a quiet corner near the elevators. "Are you insane? You came to my office to throw another tantrum. Go home." I pulled my arm free, took out my phone, and opened a photo album. "Look at the screen." Richard glanced down, annoyed, but his annoyance instantly morphed into sheer, unadulterated terror. He was staring at a screenshot of his messages with supplier Jake, followed by a screenshot of him calling his CEO a brain-dead parasite. You went through my phone," he stammered, the color completely draining from his face. "I have over 200 screenshots, Richard," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "If you do not sign an uncontested divorce agreement right now, giving me half of all liquid assets, and taking full physical and legal custody of Chloe, I will hit send on an email addressed to your CEO, the HR director, and every VP on your floor." He knew about the London assignment. He knew that if these messages leaked, he wouldn't just lose the promotion, he would be fired, blacklisted from the industry, and potentially sued for corporate fraud. "You're a monster," he breathed, trembling with a mix of fury and panic. "I'm a woman who wants a divorce." I smiled. "Sign the papers or your career ends today." "Fine," he hissed, his eyes burning with hatred. "I'll sign." A divorce truly reveals the darkest depths of human nature. Because Richard was forced to take custody of Chloe, he firmly believed he was entitled to 100% of our shared assets, to cover her future medical bills. I laughed in his face. "Absolutely not. We split everything 50-50ths. When we sat down with the lawyers to review the bank statements, Richard was shocked to find that my checking account was practically empty. I had systematically relocated my disposable income. "She is hiding money," he screamed at the mediator. "Check her statements." "Go ahead," I said calmly. The bank records showed exactly what I wanted them to show. A stressed mother spending hundreds of dollars a week on artisan foods, clothing, and various coping expenses. There were no hidden offshore accounts, no suspicious wire transfers. Legally, the money was gone. Richard, on the other hand, had a healthy savings account and a collection of luxury watches. I forced him to liquidate enough to give me a lump sum of $150,000 in cash to prevent him from dragging the process out and risking a trial. I offered a strategic compromise. "You can keep the entire equity of the townhouse. In exchange, I want a legally binding clause waiving all future child support and alimony." A clean break. Richard did the math in his head. The housing market was currently peaking, and the equity in the house looked like a massive win for him. He eagerly agreed, thinking he had outsmarted me. I signed the papers with a hidden smirk. I knew that in less than a year, the suburban housing market in our district was going to suffer a catastrophic crash due to zoning changes. That house would soon be underwater. When the mandatory cooling-off period finally ended, I stood outside the courthouse holding my finalized divorce decree. I felt lighter than air. Chloe had tagged along with Richard. She looked up at me, shaking her head in condescension. "Mom, you are so stupid. You do realize Dad is on track to make $500,000 a year, right? Why would you leave? If you just controlled your temper and stopped nagging him, we could have lived a perfect life. His cheating is honestly your fault for being so miserable to be around." I stared at the child I had once willingly given everything for. Her brain was truly broken. She had justified her father's mistreatment and infidelity just because he had money. "You think so?" I replied, slipping on my sunglasses. "Well, I hope that money keeps you warm. Good luck, Chloe. I genuinely hope you never have to come crying to me." She rolled her eyes. "Please, without your negative energy, we'll be amazing." I gave her a thumbs up and walked to my car. Chloe truly believed that my strict rules were nothing but a neurotic power trip. For 2 months she had eaten sugar, white rice, and junk food with zero immediate consequences. She fell into the exact same psychological trap that many newly diagnosed diabetics do. If it doesn't hurt right away, the doctor must be exaggerating. 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized, reality struck. Chloe collapsed in the living room, her left side completely paralyzed, her vision blurring into darkness. She was in severe metabolic shock. She begged Margaret to call an ambulance. But Margaret, terrified of the $2,000 emergency transport bill, refused. "Stop being dramatic, you just have a stomach ache," Margaret yelled, refusing to take action. It wasn't until Richard got home from work 4 hours later that she was finally rushed to the emergency room, but it was too late. Her blood sugar had spiked to dangerous levels, causing irreversible damage to her central nervous system. When Chloe was finally stabilized, the doctors delivered the grim news. Because she had completely ignored her dietary restrictions, her internal organs and nerves had sustained permanent damage. Even if she resumed the strict diet immediately, she would never regain full motor function. She would have a permanent limp, chronic pain, and severe cognitive delays. With Chloe requiring intensive, round-the-clock medical care, Richard was trapped. He begged Margaret to watch her for 6 months, so he could take the London assignment. "Are you out of your mind?" Margaret screamed. "I am not spending 6 months wiping the drool off a crippled kid. She is your problem, not mine." Because Margaret refused to step up, Richard was forced to decline the overseas assignment. The promotion to senior VP, and the massive bonus that came with it, went to his biggest corporate rival. Richard's dreams of wealth and power evaporated overnight. As for me, I quit my job, packed my bags, and moved to a vibrant sunny city 3 states away. But before I left, I kept a promise to myself. Richard thought the divorce meant his secrets were safe. He was wrong. The day my lease started in my new city, I took the USB drive containing the screenshots of his paid companions and his vulgar insults about the CEO, and mailed it anonymously directly to the desk of his company's HR director. When Chloe returned home from the hospital, her body was severely damaged. She was permanently disabled. Her metabolism shattered beyond repair. The doctor informed Richard that Chloe would require specialized in-home care, expensive physical therapy to prevent muscle atrophy, and a lifetime of high-cost medications. In my past life, I had shouldered that burden willingly, sacrificing my youth, my career, and my sanity to keep her functional. She had repaid me by mocking my efforts, treating me like garbage, and worshipping the father who did nothing. Now, she was finally going to learn what her father's love actually looked like. Richard, harboring intense resentment because Chloe's medical emergency had cost him his senior VP promotion, viewed her as nothing more than a financial anchor dragging him to the bottom of the ocean. Margaret, who had always viewed girls as inferior and sick children as a curse, openly despised her. It didn't take long for them to make a silent, cruel decision. They completely abandoned her treatment. They stopped paying for her physical therapy. They refused to buy her expensive specialty foods. They just let her deteriorate. Ironically, Chloe, possessing a teenager's consciousness, knew her condition was worsening. Without me there to shield her, she was forced to drag her own partially paralyzed body into the kitchen, attempting to cook her own restrictive meals, crying from the pain in her nerves. It was only then that she finally realized what I had actually done for her. She tried frantically to contact me, but I had changed my phone number, deleted my social media, and vanished without a trace. I had started a beautiful new life. A few weeks later, the anonymous package I sent to Richard's HR department exploded like a bomb. Richard was immediately fired for cause, stripped of his severance package, and blacklisted from the corporate finance sector. Unable to find a job that paid even a fraction of his former salary, and drowning in mortgage payments for a house that was rapidly depreciating, he spiraled into a deep depression. He started drinking heavily, and when he drank, his violent temper erupted. Margaret, unable to handle her son's drunken rages and the constant screaming matches, packed her bags and fled back to her rural hometown, abandoning Richard and Chloe entirely. Left alone with the daughter who had ruined his life, Richard directed all his frustration toward Chloe. He verbally abused her, neglected her, and eventually the mistreatment turned physical. 5 years passed. I returned to my hometown to visit my mother for the holidays. As I was walking out of a high-end boutique downtown, a frail, emaciated figure suddenly stepped into my path. "Mom!" A raspy, weak voice called out. I stopped and stared. It took me a full minute to recognize her. It was Chloe. She looked horrifying. Though biologically 9 years old, her untreated metabolic disease had ravaged her body. Her skin was gray and sagging, her hair was thinning, and she looked like a withered old woman. She stared up at me, her eyes widening in absolute shock. "Mom, you look so beautiful." And I did. Wearing a tailored camel hair trench coat, designer boots, and sporting flawless, glowing skin from a stress-free life and premium skincare. I looked 10 years younger than I had during my marriage. I smiled lightly, adjusting my scarf. That's what happens when you don't spend your life scrubbing floors, stressing over medical bills, and dealing with ungrateful parasites. I have money and time to take care of myself. Just like your father used to in our past life. Chloe's lips trembled. Suddenly she collapsed to her knees on the snowy pavement, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm sorry, Mom. I was so wrong. Please, take me with you. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. I thought you wanted to stay with your father. He doesn't care about me at all, she wailed, clutching at the hem of my coat. He drinks all day and harms me. Grandma left us. He blames me for losing his job. I can't take it anymore. Mom, please. If I stay with him, my life will end. I gently but firmly pulled my coat out of her grasp. Chloe, I would love to forgive you, I said softly, my voice devoid of any warmth. But in 2 lifetimes, you chose your father. You never showed me an ounce of empathy. Do you remember what you told me before I passed away? You said you didn't want to inherit my trash genetics. You said your father had the superior genes. She sobbed harder, shaking her head frantically. Well, I think you were right, I continued, looking down at her pathetic, broken form. You inherited your father's cold-blooded, selfish, narcissistic genetics perfectly. You are exactly like him. And I refuse to let those genetics anywhere near my life. I stepped around her and kept walking down the snowy street. I didn't look back. A few days later, I was having dinner at an upscale, dimly lit steakhouse with my friend Jessica. As we were chatting, a familiar laugh caught my attention. I looked across the dining room and spotted Sarah. She was draped over the arm of a wealthy, much older executive, giggling excessively, and playing the perfect fawning companion. It seemed she had easily moved on from Richard and found a new host to leech off of. Before I could fully process the irony of the situation, a loud commotion at the front entrance silenced the restaurant. Word had apparently spread through our old suburban network that I was back in town, looking wealthy and successful. Someone had tipped Richard off. He stormed into the dining room, frantically scanning the tables until his bloodshot eyes locked onto me. He looked absolutely wretched. He had gained a massive amount of weight, his hairline had completely receded, and he was wearing a stained, wrinkled jacket that reeked of cheap alcohol and stale cigarettes. The high-powered corporate executive was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, unhinged man. Anna, he bellowed, marching up to my table and slamming his hands down on the white linen tablecloth. You owe me. I need financial support. I need child support. You have to give me money. I calmly took a sip of my sparkling water. That is impossible, Richard. We signed a legally binding agreement. You took the house equity, and in exchange I owe you absolutely nothing. You set me up. The house is underwater. I'm bankrupt. He screamed, his face turning purple with rage. I didn't set you up, I replied coldly. You were just too greedy to see the market crashing. Now get out of my face. Humiliated in front of a room full of wealthy patrons, Richard completely snapped. He grabbed a heavy ceramic soup bowl from an adjacent empty table and hurled it directly at my head. I anticipated his violent outburst and swiftly ducked. The bowl sailed right past me and shattered violently against the shoulder of the woman sitting at the booth behind us. Sarah shrieked in pain as hot soup and porcelain shards rained down on her designer dress. Her older wealthy patron stood up, absolutely furious, and grabbed Richard by the collar, shoving him hard against a pillar. Sarah wiped her face, recognized the balding, disheveled man as her former lover, and was completely mortified, desperate to distance herself from this lunatic in front of her new target. Sarah marched up to Richard, struck him across the face twice, kicked him in the shin, and screamed at him to get out of her sight. In the ensuing chaos of waiters rushing over, and the manager calling the police, I quietly left cash on the table, slipped out the back door, and drove away into the night. Intrigued by Sarah's new setup, I couldn't resist tying up a loose end. Over the next 2 days I hired a private investigator to track her movements. Sure enough, she was playing the exact same game, manipulating wealthy men for cash. The older man she was clinging to was a highly prominent, married real estate mogul. I didn't hesitate. I compiled all the photographic evidence of their affair and mailed it anonymously to the mogul's wife. Unlike the old me, this wife was not a helpless stay-at-home mother. She was from a fiercely powerful, old money family, and she was utterly ruthless. She didn't just quietly file for divorce. She ambushed Sarah at a luxury country club with a group of her associates. In the brutal confrontation that followed, the wife cornered Sarah and splashed a freshly brewed, scalding pot of coffee directly onto her face. Sarah sustained severe burns, permanently destroying the delicate, youthful appearance she had always weaponized to manipulate men, adding financial ruin to her physical destruction. The wife unleashed a team of vicious corporate lawyers who sued Sarah into oblivion, reclaiming every dime her husband had spent on her. Sarah was left disfigured, destitute, and drowning in legal debt. Meanwhile, Richard had been thrown out of the restaurant and spent the rest of his remaining cash at a dive bar, nursing his bruised ego, his physical injuries from Sarah's beating, and his bottomless self-pity. He stumbled back into his decaying townhouse late at night, blaming all of his catastrophic failures on the disabled daughter who had ruined his life and career. He kicked open Chloe's bedroom door. In a blind, drunken rage, he unleashed his absolute worst on her. He screamed that she was a burden, a mistake, and a curse, physically mistreating her frail body. Chloe was biologically a child, and her untreated metabolic disease had left her bones brittle, her muscles atrophied, and her internal organs incredibly weak. She couldn't defend herself, and her body couldn't withstand the trauma. Richard didn't realize the extent of his own terrible strength. By the time he sobered up the next morning and walked into her room, Chloe had passed away. The police arrested Richard within hours. The local news media got hold of the story, and it exploded into a massive nationwide scandal. The horrific details of the case, the prolonged medical neglect, the psychological abuse, and the fatal mistreatment of a severely disabled child by her own father, sparked absolute public outrage. Protesters gathered outside the county courthouse, holding signs and demanding the maximum penalty. Given the heinous, aggravated nature of the crime, the state prosecutor pushed for the ultimate sentence. The trial was swift and uncompromising. Richard was convicted of a severe capital offense and sentenced to the maximum legal penalty, with Richard sitting in maximum security, waiting for his final sentence. Margaret's life completely unraveled. Her husband had passed away years ago, and Richard was her only son. He was supposed to be her pride and joy, her retirement plan, her proof of superiority. Now, he was a convicted criminal. The community's disgust shifted entirely onto her. The neighbors, remembering her cruel gossip, her laziness, and her toxic behavior toward me, showed zero sympathy. People secretly dumped garbage on her front porch. Someone threw buckets of filthy, stagnant water at her front door. She became a pariah, unable to walk down the street to the grocery store without being spat on or cursed at by disgusted strangers. Terrified and entirely isolated, she packed whatever she could carry and fled the suburbs, returning to her rural hometown. But the news had reached the country too. The entire town knew what she and her son had done to a sick little girl. She was universally despised, shunned even by her own extended relatives. Margaret lived out her final years in a dilapidated, drafty farmhouse, consumed by bitterness, isolation, and regret. One freezing winter night, during a severe blizzard, the power grid failed. With no one willing to check on her, the cold seeped into her bones. She succumbed to the freezing cold in her sleep, entirely alone. It was weeks before the authorities finally broke down her door and discovered her body. As for me, I watched the news of Richard's maximum sentence on the flat-screen television in my sun-drenched penthouse. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city skyline, holding a glass of expensive red wine. I took a slow sip, turned off the television, and smiled.
That's all for today. I'm Lina. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more amazing stories every week. Thanks for watching.